Welcome back to Bazooka Kickboxing and MMA. Today's episode, powered by Perfect Sports Nutrition, is a preview of all the great content and training lessons you will get at bazookatraining.com. Welcome back to bazookatraining.com here in the bag workout section. Today we're focusing more on our pivoting, working to use that pivot to generate power. It's crazy that even the highest level of fighters that aren't pivoting their feet, they're losing so much power. Yes, sometimes when you do quick punches, you might not pivot, but you have to have the ability to sit on your punches. And learning to pivot makes sure your feet and your stance is at a good length, your hips turning over, and you're generating maximum power. That's our goal for today's video. All right, so let's get into it. Now, what we're gonna start with here on the bag is we're gonna start with our jab. And a lot of people think about pivoting. Do you pivot on a jab, right? So I'm talking to you as kickboxers and MMA fighters where a lot of times we teach to jab with our front foot pointing forward, right? But at that point now, there's no power, there's no generation. So for today, we're gonna be doing our bag work stationary, right? So the main thing when we wanna generate power for a jab, okay, I wanna be able to have my front foot bladed a little bit, okay? So if I just step with a straight foot, I don't have the ability to drive my hip, my power, and even my setup punches aren't gonna be as great. So a lot of times when I do jab, okay, I step with a little bit of a bladed stance. It's going to help me, one, protect my chin a little bit, get my head offline. Now, this is the big debated topic in kickboxing because they say when you jab, what do we do at Bazooka Kickboxing? We chop the leg. But my always point is if I'm jabbing and you're not kicking my leg, I'm going to do it in the best maximum way to generate as much power. If you start chopping my leg, then yes, I'll make an adjustment. But until then, I'm going to try to hit you with maximum power to do the most damage. So at this point here, usually I'll start with a nice bladed jab, okay? So from here, I'm heavy bladed. It allows me to set it up. Now, even when I do jab, the main thing is I'm not stepping when I jab. I'm not going to get it. So when I push off that back, okay, that drives me and gives me that little bladed. So even if I'm standing, this is why I call it a pivot, even if I'm standing here blocking kicks, as soon as I jab, I create this little step out with my heel. Now, if I want to generate the next round, I can generate more power because of that bladed step, and it keeps me a little bit more defensive. I'm not going to give you a big squared center line. I'm going to narrow it for you to give you less targets to attack, okay? So that is basically using the jab. Now, even a nice little tip to get more power, and one of the guys, I'm going to give you two main fighters that I see use this the best. I would say John Wayne Parr would be one, and the second would be Badr Hari. Instead of just stepping straight with this way or staying bladed, they like to keep their shoulders square. And what they load up the jab by leading with the rear side, boom, so it helps you get that generation power. You add it with the bladed stance, you're gonna get that much more power. Okay, so that is the jab with the bladed step, okay? It's a little bit of a variation. Now, with the next two rounds are the most important when it comes to pivoting. That's your rear hand as well as your lead hook. And your rear hook as well, right? I use that with the rear cross, a rear uppercut. That's all showing the same pivot. So what we're gonna do here is I don't want you stepping, so we're gonna keep our hands loaded, and I need to find my range just where my back foot pivots and I can drive my hip. Boom, okay, boom. And then finding that rear pivot. Now, the important part of the pivot is it turns my hip. Okay? In order to generate power, I need my hip to turn. One of my biggest pet peeves when we're working technical power striking is when we're stepping a punch without a pivot on the back foot. Your arch starts collapsing, your big toe gets pressed in, right? We're losing and leaking power at that point. So even when I do pivot on that back foot, I make sure my big toe goes with it and my feet are strong. One of the habits kickboxers like to make, which is not bad, but when we're kicking, we like to have a wider stance. But the problem is, I don't get maximum power on my rear crosses or my punches. So I need to make sure I'm in good balance and I'm pivoting on that back foot. So from here now, what we're gonna do is you can paw out with your jab, and then you find your rear hand with that pivot, rear straight. I also have a rear hook that I'm gonna pivot similar way. I can do a shovel shot, and I can drive an uppercut, right? Focusing on that rear foot pivot, okay? Very important. Now, for those who are feeling good and a little bit more advanced, what you can do is you can step out a little bit, right? You can jab with the bladed stance and then pivot with the back foot, nice and slow. A lot of times when I do this drill, I like to even hold my punches to make sure my stance and my balance is right. Boom, feel it. Then when I feel comfortable, bang, boom. Exit out, one step, bladed jab. And you notice right now, before I even throw my rear hand, my feet position aren't straight. If that's the point, I can't pivot. So even when I jab, my feet are pointing this direction. Now I can generate power by pivoting that back foot. So if I'm setting it up, my back foot is pointing, right? And then boom, I can drive that hand to be able to generate power. So that rear pivot is what's gonna help me snap my punch and help me generate more power. Okay, now let's move into the third punch that you need to be able to pivot, and that's our lead hand or our lead hook, right? But I can't get a nice pivot off my lead side without pivoting off my rear side. So from here, I want to load that side up. So even if I throw that cross and then use it as a feint, I need to get my head on top of my knee. I don't want to be here. I want power. So when I pivot, right, that back foot pivot allows me to load up my lead hip, gets my head on top of my knee, weight transfer, and it even gets my head offline now so I can generate that power on the hook, okay? So on our bag here, you can throw the cross. It's just a nice setup because you can use it as a feint, right? So if anything, it just teaches you good habits on how to set things up. So here, and I load. Now make sure when you load, you bring your foot closer. Kickboxers, again, with this long stance, I don't want to pivot and get power hooks from my stance too long. I'm off balance, I'm unstructured. So a lot of times, even if I'm in this long stance, right, I'm feinting. I can kick beautifully from here, but when I feint, I want to bring this back foot up so I can step again and generate power with the hook. Okay, so even if I'm in that long stance, I'll feint with it, but my back foot comes up on that feint. Now this becomes my launch point for my second punches and a nice rotation hook. Okay, so again, set up the rear hand with a nice strong pivot. Use it as a feint, boom. Now I'm loaded, I'm inside, I can pivot to the head, I can pivot to the body. I got multiple hooks and power this way, okay? So this last little sequence here, let's put everything together, okay? So let's do a bladed jab, boom, nice rotation cross. I throw a jab in that nice strong bladed stance, I'll feint, and then I drive my left hook, okay? So that's a nice little sequence for you to practice. I'll get my jab with a bladed stance, head offline. Okay, if I want to load it up, bang, strong feet, rear pivot on the cross. I jab, I feint, bring my back foot nice and loaded, and then I can generate power with this hook, okay? Making sure my feet are strong, my big toes not collapsing on my pivot. I'm keeping nice strong arches, and that's gonna help you generate the maximum power, okay? Slow things down. On fast combinations, you're gonna lose the pivot, but the ability to sit there, and when you do decide to sit on your punch, I do want you to have that pivot, the strong hip, to get maximum power and the knockouts, all right? Hope you learned a lot in today's episode, and we'll see you next time here at bazookatraining.com.